Hi all, and welcome back to the Movement Lesson Sports Academy. Following the tragic death recently of footballer George Baldock, I've read a lot of content on the internet, and on reflection, I think it's important that three questions are answered. One, is the sudden deaths of footballers on the rise, or is it a case of the multimedia presence that we now have just making us more aware of every single incident that possibly we didn't have previously? Two, are clubs doing enough to help identify players that are at risk of sudden death? And three, is there anything that we can do in the approach to training that can also help reduce the risk that players are suffering? I think it's really important that we learn from what's gone on, and we think about the welfare of the players and do all we can for the future of the players and their families and friends, because it really is a tragic event. If we look at this in terms of each of the questions that we've asked, one, now we've got multimedia sources. It might not be possible that previously we were aware of in the 1960s, 1970s, where there wasn't the same level of media presence when players were died suddenly. What were they reported? Were we aware of those deaths as much as we are nowadays with all the different media? And it's now there's 24/7 news media outlets, so we can't get away from these, and everyone's aware of them, and everyone's adding their opinions to what the causes are. Secondly, are clubs doing enough to screen players and also identify those players at risk? Now, I know since the turn of the century, that has definitely been increased within football clubs, and it's been more of a priority. And you can see that there's reports of players who no longer are able to play because of genetic conditions, particularly heart conditions that have been picked up on. Now, we work with a lot of families with children who have movement disorders caused by suspected genetic variations. The problem that a lot of these families suffer from is quite often, although they're diagnosed with a genetic condition, what the genetic condition actually is very hard to determine, and often takes years of investigations before professionals are able to fully identify what the cause is that might be impacting the brain, might be impacting the learning, might be impacting their movement. So just because clubs are doing screening to identify players doesn't mean that it's going to 100% find the issues that they might have. Now, I don't know the ins and outs of it's not just George Baldock this year, but we've also got Mateja Sarkic, the Wolves goalkeeper, who sadly passed away in the summer as well, several days after representing Montenegro. But the issue is that they might have had a genetic condition and gone through screening and gone through transfers for clubs, and they might never have actually picked up on those conditions. So although clubs are improving their screening, it might be something that we look at. Can we increase or improve genetic testing to identify that? Now, that's going to be costly, and it's probably going to be more time consuming for clubs. But again, it could be something that's in the best interest of the welfare of the players. How feasible that is, I really don't know. And again, we go back to the first question, and is this on the rise? I think that's something that for FIFA, for UEFA, for the Premier League to really look to investigate. It could be a potential PhD research project to do an exploratory research to find out, is it on the rise and what are the key causes, and then look at develop that into future suggestions on how that can be reduced to help with screening, to help with genetic testing, to identify potential players at risk. And thirdly, and probably the question I want to talk about the most today is based around how is our approach to training impacting the risk that players are putting themselves at. Now, if you think back to the 60s and 70s and the training that the players had was nowhere near the level of training that players are under nowadays. Now, I know we can go back to probably the formation of the Premier League in Britain to sort of say when we really got high levels of professional standards, and certainly since the millennium, players are fitter than they ever have been, which seems great. And you would suspect that the fitter and healthier somebody is, the less risk there are of suffering from sudden death or even a significant injury. However, the same level of strain and stress and load was not put on the body previously prior to the last 20 years. It really has become a case of our strength and conditioning at clubs becoming too good, and they're getting the players too fit that it's just becoming too much for their bodies to be able to handle. If you think about people who perhaps do suffer from a genetic condition, or increased risk of heart disease or a heart attack or other problems, they're probably there the whole life, and it's only later on in life as the body slows down that they actually suffer from a potential life-ending incident. The level of fitness and the strain and stress that players are putting the bodies under nowadays is actually expediting that process. And I don't know the ins and outs, and it'll be up to the family and friends of Baldock and Sarkic to actually release that information. But it could actually be something that benefits clubs and players in the future as well. Is it something that we could do? We look at now players, if anyone follows a lot of players on Instagram, the players are training throughout the off season. It's like they never actually take a break. And is it something that really needs to be encouraged by clubs and enforced, that players spend the off season really relaxing and resting? Now, you might think, and as a manager, you might be delighted that players are coming back for pre-season with a good level of fitness, ready to go and attack pre-season and be fit and ready to go for game one. But is that also not allowing the body to rest and recover fully? Is that increasing the stress and strain that we're putting on a system? Secondly, there's an increased emphasis on strength all the time. Now, the increased amount of injuries that we're seeing throughout the sport is showing that increased muscle, which you would associate with reducing injury risk, might not actually be beneficial and is not having the desired effect that we're looking for. So the next thing that we potentially look at is, can we change that whole mindset towards a real strength-based approach, a real high level of aerobic fitness, to actually looking at potentially reducing fitness levels? Now, this has got to happen as league-wide, and it might be a case if we look at capping the training loads that players are able to go into. So strength and conditioning at clubs now is fantastic. Looking at VO2 max, the amount of testing that they're doing on players and working out, and looking at the levels that players are training in every single week. Maybe it's a case of we actually look at restricting the amount of time that they're able to spend working in certain training zones, because that might help reduce the strain and stress that's being put on the body. Another factor that I think we could look at then is looking at, can we put greater emphasis on movement? And we can look at the fact that, okay, we might develop the strength or flexibility in players, but another way to reduce injury risk is to look at their movement and maybe look at greater weight transfer and weight loading, and look at the impact that movement is actually having, and focusing more on movement to reduce injury risk rather than building up strength levels or flexibility levels just as a focus. Because I really think that although we can look at brain development and we think of increased amount of exercise, getting to lactate thresholds, working in certain aerobic threshold is great for brain development, and the cleverer and more intelligent players are from that brain development, the better they're going to be at decision making. But we can also look at neuromapping through weight transfer and through feedback that we're getting through the body. So I think that if we start to adjust the way that we start to look at player training, we maybe look at capping training zones to help reduce the load that we're putting on the body, maybe going back perhaps 20 years in terms of training, or 30 years to levels of training, encouraging, making sure that players have more rest. because the current process at the minute doesn't seem to be working. We're almost putting the body under too much stress and strain. So can we look to improve movement as a way to reduce injury, and also as a result of capping the training loads and putting more emphasis on correcting movements? Then is that going to look for inaccuracies in movement, whether it's through force plates or devices and technology that look to look at weight transfer through different movements? We can actually improve how players move to reduce that injury and putting less strain on the body. You look at the likes of Baldock, that was known as a high energy, fit wing back who would be up and down the line every single game, and I'm sure his fitness levels would be off the charts. It's not something that potentially that strain is potentially been a cause that's affected him. Like I said, it could be years until that information's known, and it's entirely up to the family whether they release that information. But it's certainly something that, as clubs, and we think about the welfare of our players moving forward, that we could look into. One, is it on the rise? Is it a case of just media being able to report these incidents that have always happened easier? Or is it something that needs further investigation? Perhaps it's a good PhD project for somebody to look into. Number two, is there any way that clubs are screening? And like I said, that the screening seems to have helped reduce incidents from the early 2000s, and there's identifying players who were struggling, but or putting potentially at risk. But it also doesn't seem to have solved the problem or stopped it if it is on the rise. And thirdly, then, can we change our approach to training and put greater emphasis on movement to reduce injury, rather than perhaps a strength-based approach, or having too much of a focus on cardiovascular fitness, and we look at capping the thresholds, the amount of time that every player is able to spend in certain training zones, whilst ensuring and encouraging players to have a rest during the off-season. That's my 3 questions. I hope it's something that the professionals might look into and look to address. It's certainly something that I don't want any. I think a lot of fans and family have been affected by this, and it's certainly something that we'd like to reduce moving forward. We want a great game. We want to enjoy the game, but we want to make sure that our players are healthy and safe. If you like what you see, please give us a like and subscribe to the channel so that you can keep checking back and are aware of future videos. Thanks very much.